The mansion stood tall at the edge of the hill, surrounded by silence, but inside, it was anything but quiet. From the outside, it looked like perfection. Marble floors, shining glass doors, and a garden big enough for a small park. But once you stepped through the front door, that illusion shattered instantly. Toys scattered across the hallway, crayons on the wall, spilled milk near the kitchen door. The laughter and screams of 3 little boys echoed through the house triplets. Barely 5 years old, full of energy and mischief. They weren't bad kids, just wild, unrestrained. They had lost their mother too early, and their father, a busy millionaire businessman, didn't know how to fill that space. He loved his children, but love wasn't enough when chaos ruled every room. Every week, a new nanny tried to bring order, and every week, another one left. Some quit crying, others left quietly before breakfast. This week was the worst. 5 nannies in 5 days. Each lasted less than the one before. The mansion staff whispered stories among themselves. Did you hear? The twins know. The triplets locked the last nanny in the laundry room. Another added, she ran out crying, said she'd never come back. Even the gardener shook his head. You couldn't pay me enough to deal with those boys. The father, exhausted, stood in his office one evening, staring at a framed picture of his late wife. You made it look so easy, he whispered. I can't do this alone. He had built a fortune with discipline and control, but inside his own home, there was none. Every corner screamed of disorder, as if the house itself reflected his broken peace. That night, he called the agency again. His voice was calm, but there was frustration beneath it. I don't care who you send, he said, just find someone who can handle them. The agency promised they'd send one last candidate in the morning. She's not a nanny, they said carefully. She's a maid, but she has experience with children. He sighed. Fine, send her. The next morning, sunlight poured through the big kitchen windows. The boys were already awake, creating their daily disaster cereal on the floor, juice dripping from the counter. One of them dancing in socks on the spilled milk like it was a skating rink. Their father was leaving for work. Already in his dark blue suit, tie perfectly straight, trying to ignore the mess. Boys, please behave today, he said, though even he didn't believe it. The middle triplet laughed. Sure, Dad, which really meant no chance. At exactly 9, the front doorbell rang. A soft knock followed. The butler opened the door, expecting another nervous young nanny holding a clipboard, but instead, a woman stood there with a calm face and simple clothes, a navy uniform, tidy hair, and eyes that seemed kind but steady. Good morning, she said politely. I'm here, from the agency. When she stepped inside, she didn't flinch at the noise. She didn't comment on the mess. She just smiled lightly, as if she'd seen worse. The father came downstairs, surprised by her calmness. You're not a nanny, he asked. No, sir, she replied gently. I'm a maid, but I can help wherever needed. He hesitated. You're sure you want this job? They've driven out 5 people already. She met his eyes, unafraid. Children act wild when they need to be seen, sir. Maybe they just need someone to see them. That line made him pause. Within minutes, the boys noticed her. 3 sets of curious eyes peeked from the corner. Who's that? Whispered the oldest. She looks boring, said another. Let's test her, the third grinned. They poured orange juice across the table and laughed. The maid turned around slowly, looked at the mess, and smiled. Well, she said calmly, since you made it, I guess we'd better clean it together. The boys froze. No shouting. No scolding. She knelt down, handed them small sponges, and started wiping. They stared at her for a moment, then slowly began copying her movements. One wiped the counter, another picked up cereal, and the third tried to squeeze the sponge too hard, splashing water back onto his face. He burst into laughter, and so did she. It wasn't perfect. The floor was still sticky, and juice dripped onto her shoes. But something unusual happened that morning. The house, for the first time, felt calm. From the doorway. The millionaire watched silently. He didn't understand it. There was no yelling, no chaos, just laughter and teamwork. He looked at her again, curious. Who was this woman? How did she do that? As she finished cleaning, she looked up at the boys and said softly, "See? It's easier when we do it together." They nodded, small smiles replacing their usual smirks. That night, after the house went quiet, the father sat at his desk thinking, maybe this wasn't just luck. Maybe this maid had something none of the others did, patience. He didn't know it yet, but this was the day everything began to change. The house of chaos had finally met its calm. The next morning felt different inside the mansion. There was still noise. Of course, 3 little boys laughing and arguing over cereal boxes, but something subtle had changed. It was quieter, lighter, as if the air itself carried less tension. The new maid arrived early, wearing the same simple navy blue uniform, with a white collar and apron. Her shoes were plain but polished, her hair neatly tied back. She moved with calm purpose, neither hurried nor nervous. The millionaire watched her from the balcony as she carried her small bag inside. She didn't look like someone trying to impress him. She looked like someone who knew who she was, and that made him curious. "Good morning, sir," she greeted him politely, her voice steady and gentle. He nodded, still unsure what to make of her. "The boys will test you," he said, his tone half warning, half resigned. She smiled. "That's all right. Every child tests what they don't trust yet." He frowned slightly at her choice of words, but said nothing. He just gestured toward the kitchen and walked away to his office. When she entered the kitchen, the boys were already plotting. One was stacking cereal boxes like building blocks. Another was pouring orange juice into a toy cup. And the third was trying to see how far he could throw a slice of toast before it hit the wall. The maid paused at the doorway and observed for a moment. Then, instead of shouting or rushing, she said softly, "Looks like you're all having fun." The boys stopped and stared. That wasn't the reaction they expected. The one with the toast grinned mischievously. "We're making breakfast," he said proudly, though half the food was on the floor. "Is that so?" she replied, stepping closer. "Well, breakfast is always better when the table looks nice. What if we make it together?" She started picking up crumbs, not with frustration, but with patience. She even hummed a soft tune under her breath, something gentle, almost like a lullaby. The boys exchanged glances. Usually, adults either yelled or ignored them. This woman was doing neither. Slowly, one of them joined in, mimicking her movements. "Like this?" he asked. She nodded. "Exactly. You're good at this." The second boy came closer, dragging a chair just to reach the counter. "Can I pour the milk?" "You can," she said, "but carefully. Let's see if you can do it without spilling." The challenge caught his attention. For the first time, he focused, really focused, on a task. The milk wobbled in the carton, but he managed it. The maid clapped softly. "See? Told you you could." The third boy, the most stubborn one, tried to hide a smile. "You're weird," he said. She laughed, not offended at all. "Maybe. But weird people make life interesting, don't they?" He grinned, a small, reluctant one, but it was there. From the hallway, the millionaire overheard the laughter and paused. He stood quietly by the doorframe, just out of sight, watching as his sons worked together to clean the table and set out plates. It had been weeks, no, months since he had seen them cooperate without fighting. He watched the maid crouch down to their level, talking to them eye to eye, not above them. She listened when they spoke. She laughed when they laughed. He didn't understand it. She wasn't giving orders, yet they obeyed. Before leaving for work, he stepped into the kitchen. "Everything all right in here?" The boys looked at him proudly. "We cleaned the table," one shouted. He raised his eyebrows, clearly impressed. "You did," the maid nodded. "They worked together. They even helped me prepare the juice." He turned to the boys again. "That's good." "Very good." For a moment, he didn't know what else to say. Then he cleared his throat and left for work, feeling oddly unsettled, not by trouble, but by peace. Later that afternoon, the maid continued her work. She didn't just clean surfaces. She organized chaos gently, stacking toys neatly, folding tiny socks. humming softly as she went. The triplets followed her from room to room, curious about everything she did. "What are you singing?" asked one boy. "An old song my mother used to sing when I cleaned with her," she replied. "Your mum made you clean?" another boy asked, surprised. "She made me help," she corrected kindly. "Because when you help, you feel proud. Try it, it feels good." They thought about that. Then one of them picked up a toy car from under the couch and handed it to her. "I helped," he said. She smiled warmly. "Yes, you did. Thank you." It was such a small thing, yet it felt like a beginning. When the millionaire returned that evening, he expected the usual noise, the mess, the cries of "we're hungry," echoing through the hall, but instead, he stepped into a home that smelled like freshly baked bread. The lights were soft. The boys were sitting quietly at the table, coloring. He blinked, unsure if he'd entered the right house. The maid appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands with a towel. "Dinner is ready, sir," she said. He hesitated, glancing at the boys. They behaved. "They did more than that," she said with a gentle smile. "They helped." He looked at her for a long moment. There was something about her presence, not forceful, not demanding, just steady, like a calm breeze in a storm. That night, after everyone went to bed, he found himself replaying the day in his mind. For the first time in months, the house hadn't felt heavy. He didn't know what she was doing differently. But deep down, he knew this woman was not just another employee. Something about her was changing the air in his home, and soon, it would change everything else. To asterisk, the next few days moved differently inside the mansion. The shouting that once filled the halls was replaced by soft conversations, laughter, and sometimes even the sound of the maid's gentle humming echoing. From room to room, the millionaire noticed it first when he came down one morning for coffee. The kitchen, usually a battlefield of crumbs and spills, was spotless. The triplets sat at the table quietly, eating their breakfast. Not arguing over cereal boxes for once. He looked around in disbelief. "What's going on here?" he asked half-jokingly. The maid smiled without looking up from the stove. "Just a normal morning, sir." The oldest boy raised his hand proudly. "We made the toast. And we cleaned the table," added the youngest, a bit too excitedly. Dropping a piece of bread onto the floor, the maid bent down and picked it up, still smiling. "And we're learning how to keep it clean, right?" Three little heads nodded together. The father couldn't help but chuckle. He poured his coffee and leaned against the counter, watching the scene. He didn't understand how she did it, but he couldn't deny it. Something real was happening. Later that day, while he was on a business call in his office, he overheard faint giggling from the hallway. Normally, that sound meant trouble. But when he stepped out, he found the boys sitting cross-legged on the floor, folding tiny towels beside the maid. Each boy had a small pile, and though their folds were messy and uneven, their focus was serious. "What are they doing?" he asked quietly. The maid didn't stop working. "Learning responsibility," she said softly. "They like helping. They just needed to be shown how." He raised an eyebrow. "You're making 5-year-olds fold laundry." "They're not folding laundry," she corrected kindly. "They're learning pride." Something about her words made him pause. He'd always believed in structure, order, and results, but never thought of pride as part of discipline. He watched a moment longer, then returned to his office though, for the first time in a while. He struggled to concentrate. Over the next week, the maid began introducing small lessons in ways that didn't feel like rules. When the boys spilled juice, she didn't shout. She handed them towels. When they fought over toys, she made them sit together quietly, and asked each one to explain what happened. Her method was simple: no fear, no punishment, just calm understanding. One afternoon, she sat them down around the kitchen table. "You know," she began gently, "people who make mistakes aren't bad, but they have to fix what they break. That's how we grow." The middle triplet frowned. "So, if I spill milk again, I just clean it." She smiled. "Yes. And next time, you'll be careful, because you'll remember how much work cleaning it takes." The boys nodded slowly. It wasn't just cleaning anymore, it was learning. Even the mansion staff began noticing the change. The butler whispered to the chef one evening, "I haven't seen the boys throw food in 3 days." The chef grinned. Miracle of the century. Everyone laughed softly, but they all knew it wasn't a miracle. It was patience, something money could never buy. One night, the millionaire returned home later than usual. He walked past the living room and stopped. There, on the floor, the maid sat with the triplets. They were surrounded by picture books, crayons, and a mess of paper. But it wasn't chaos, it was life. One of the boys looked up, excited. "We're drawing our family," he said. The maid smiled at him. "They're showing me everyone they love." The millionaire hesitated at the doorway, curious. "Can I see?" he asked. The children eagerly held up their drawings. Each paper had a stick figure family, a tall man in a suit, 3 small boys, and next to them, a woman in a blue dress with a white apron. "That's her," the youngest said proudly. "She helps us when we fight." The millionaire's chest tightened unexpectedly. He looked at the maid. She smiled, but her eyes carried warmth deeper than words. He cleared his throat and said softly, "They've drawn you into the family." She looked down for a moment. Maybe that's because they're finally starting to feel like one again. He didn't reply, but that night, as he lay in bed, he thought about her words over and over. For the first time since his wife's death, he felt a small crack open in the wall he'd built around his heart. The next morning, as he prepared for work, he noticed something odd on his desk, a small folded piece of paper. He opened it carefully. Inside, written in childish handwriting, were the words, "We love you, Dad. We cleaned our room." There was even a drawing of a broom next to it. He smiled, a real smile, the kind that reached his eyes. He hadn't realized how much he'd missed that feeling. When he walked downstairs, the maid was already tidying up the breakfast area. He stopped beside her. "They wrote me a note," he said quietly. "I don't think they've ever done that before." She looked up from the counter, her expression soft. They just needed someone to remind them how. He studied her for a long moment. "You're teaching them more than manners." "Maybe," she said with a small smile, "but they're teaching me something too." He tilted his head. "And what's that?" "That love doesn't always need big words or big things. Sometimes, it just needs time." He said nothing, but in that silence, something changed. The man who once ruled his home with money and frustration began to understand the power of small kindnesses. And while he didn't say it out loud, in his heart he knew this maid was doing more than cleaning his house. She was cleaning the emptiness that had lived there for far too long. The house had changed. Everyone could feel it. There was laughter at breakfast, quiet during dinner, and soft music playing from the kitchen most evenings. The mansion, once filled with shouting and slammed doors, now felt alive again. The millionaire had started coming home earlier, sometimes even before sunset. He didn't say it out loud, but he wanted to see it. That peace she somehow brought with her. One evening, after a long day at work, he arrived home quietly, not wanting to disturb anyone. As he stepped into the hallway, he heard gentle voices coming from the living room. The maid was sitting on the couch with the triplets, their heads resting on her lap. She was telling them a story in her calm melodic voice. "And the little bird," she said softly, "even though it was small, it never gave up, because it believed it could still fly again." The boys' eyelids grew heavy. One by one, they drifted to sleep, her voice like a lullaby wrapping around them. The millionaire stood in the doorway, silent. He didn't want to interrupt. There was something about her presence, peaceful, strong, yet touched with something he couldn't quite name. After a while, she gently lifted each boy and laid them in their beds, tucking the blankets close. Then she went back downstairs and began cleaning up the toys and books they'd left behind. He watched her from the stairs, unseen. She moved slowly, her steps soft, her face thoughtful. Then, when she thought no one was around, she sat at the table, rested her hands on her knees, and sighed deeply, a quiet, heavy sound that carried years of pain. She looked toward the dark window and whispered, "I hope you're proud of me, my little one." The millionaire froze. Her voice trembled slightly, and in that moment, he understood she wasn't just patient because she was kind. She was patient because she'd known loss. The next morning, he found her in the garden trimming the flowers. He hesitated, then stepped closer. "You work hard," he said gently. "Even when no one's watching." She smiled faintly. "Work keeps the heart steady." He looked at her for a moment, before asking, "Who were you talking to last night?" She stopped trimming. For a few seconds, she said nothing. Then she looked up slowly. "You heard that?" He nodded, quietly. Her eyes softened. It's my daughter," she said, almost in a whisper. "She passed away 3 years ago. A sickness we couldn't afford to fight for long." The millionaire's chest tightened. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice low. She nodded, holding back tears. "She was about the same age as your boys. I think that's why I understand them, their noise, their stubbornness, even their mischief. I see a little bit of her in each of them." He didn't know what to say. He just stood there, listening. She continued quietly. "After she was gone, I stopped working for a while. I couldn't be around children. Every laugh reminded me of her voice." There was a long pause. The sound of the morning birds filled the silence between them. "But one day," she said softly, "I realized hiding from life wasn't helping. My daughter wouldn't have wanted me to stop caring. So, I started again, cleaning homes, helping families. Every child I meet, I treat as if she's watching me from somewhere, proud that her mother is still trying." The millionaire felt a lump in his throat. He'd spent years building walls around his own grief, pretending work could erase the emptiness left by his wife's death. But here was a woman who'd lost even more, and instead of shutting down, she'd opened her heart wider. That evening, he couldn't focus on his laptop. Her words replayed in his mind like a gentle echo. When he walked into the living room, the boys were playing on the floor. The maid sat nearby, folding their laundry while humming the same lullaby he'd heard the night before. He sat down across from her. "You've done something remarkable," he said quietly. She looked up, unsure what he meant. "My sons," he continued. "I couldn't reach them for months. I tried rules, money, even stricter nannies. But you reached them with patience. You brought them back to me." Her eyes lowered modestly. "They were never gone, sir. They were just waiting for you to look at them again." He felt her words like a gentle blow, painful, but true. He realized how distant he'd been, how he'd buried himself in business to avoid facing his own grief. "I should have been there more," he murmured. She smiled softly. "You're here now. That's what matters." The days that followed carried a new rhythm. The millionaire started spending more time at home reading bedtime stories, helping the boys with small tasks, even burning pancakes on a Sunday morning. The maid would laugh quietly at his clumsy efforts, but never mocked him. "They don't care if the pancakes are burned," she said once. "They care that you made them." And she was right. Slowly, something unspoken grew between them, not romance, but deep respect. Two souls who had known loss, quietly helping each other heal without even realizing it. One night, as the stars shimmered above the quiet house, the millionaire sat in his study, staring at a photo of his wife and children. He smiled faintly, not with sadness, but with peace. For the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. Down the hall, the maid tucked in the triplets, whispering softly, "Good night, my brave boys." And though she didn't say it aloud, in her heart, she added, "Good night, my little one. I'm still trying." Weeks passed, and the mansion no longer felt like the same place. The chaos, the shouting, the broken routines, all of it had slowly faded into something warmer, something that finally felt like home. The mornings began with laughter now. The triplets woke up early, rushing down the stairs to see who could greet the maid first. She'd already be there, preparing breakfast, humming softly to herself. The smell of pancakes and fresh fruit drifting through the air. "Good morning, my helpers," she'd say cheerfully, and 3 little voices would echo back, "Good morning." They would set the table together, crooked plates, uneven napkins. Juice poured to full, but she never corrected them harshly. She'd just smile and say, "Perfect effort." And when the millionaire walked in, coffee in hand, they'd all look up, waiting for his reaction. He would smile, a smile that had become more natural lately, and say, "Looks amazing, boys." It wasn't about perfection anymore. It was about being together. One Sunday morning, the boys came running into his study, faces bright with excitement. "Dad, don't come to the kitchen yet," the oldest said. The middle one added, "It's a surprise." And before he could ask what was happening, they were gone again, little feet thudding across the marble floor. He raised an eyebrow, amused. What are they planning now? When he finally entered the kitchen 15 minutes later, he froze. The maid stood beside the counter, smiling proudly, while the triplets, each wearing a tiny apron, presented him with breakfast. Burnt toast, slightly runny eggs, and a paper card colored in messy crayon strokes that said, "We cleaned it up. Just like she taught us." The words hit him harder than he expected. He knelt down to their level, his voice soft. "You made all this?" The youngest nodded quickly. "We even washed the dishes." "Well, 2 of them," he laughed quietly, his eyes growing wet. "It's the best breakfast I've ever had." The maid stood quietly in the background, hands folded, her eyes gentle and full of pride. That morning changed something deep in him. He realized the house had been clean for weeks, but it wasn't just tidy floors or polished furniture. It was emotionally clean. The guilt, the distance, the loneliness all swept away, little by little, by patience and kindness. For the first time, the millionaire felt something he hadn't felt since his wife's passing peace that evening. As the children played in the living room, he called the maid into his study. She hesitated at the door, wiping her hands on her apron. "You needed me, sir?" "Yes," he said softly, setting aside his work. "I wanted to thank you. For everything you've done?" She smiled humbly. "I'm just doing my job." He shook his head. "No. You've done far more than that. You've given my children back their laughter. You've given me back a home." For a moment, she didn't know what to say. Gratitude flickered across her face, but she stayed humble. "It wasn't just me, sir. You let yourself be part of it again. That's what made the difference." He nodded slowly, realizing she was right. He had learned more from her than he ever expected to. Days turned into weeks, and the bond between them deepened. The maid became part of the family's rhythm, not as a worker, but as a quiet guide. She taught the boys how to plant flowers in the garden, how to fold their own clothes, how to say thank you and mean it. Every small lesson carried something bigger: responsibility, empathy, love. Even the millionaire joined in now. One evening, the children begged him to help bake cookies. He tried, and ended up covering himself in flour. The boys laughed so hard they nearly cried. The maid simply handed him a towel, chuckling. "See, messes are good, sir. They remind us we're living." He grinned back, brushing flour off his sleeves. "I'm learning that and here's not just how to bake, but how to live again." That weekend, the triplets put on a little show in the living room. They dressed up in capes, made from old bedsheets, and took turns playing different roles. One pretended to be the maid, one, the father, and the third, their late mother, whom they remembered only through stories. At the end of their play, they all hugged and said together, "Family means helping each other." The room went silent. The millionaire's eyes filled with tears. The maid turned away for a moment, her heart swelling. When the applause faded, the father looked at her and said quietly, "You did this." She shook her head gently. "No, sir. They did this. You all did." But deep down, he knew her presence had changed everything that night. After the boys went to bed, the millionaire stood in the hallway outside their room. The soft glow of the nightlight spilled across the floor. The maid was still there, adjusting the blankets around the children. Brushing a stray curl from one boy's forehead, she looked peaceful, almost angelic in the soft light. He whispered, "Thank you." She turned slightly, surprised. "For what?" "For bringing love back into this house." She smiled softly. "Love was always here, sir. It just needed someone to clean away the dust." And that night, for the first time in years, the house slept in harmony. No crying, no shouting, no loneliness. The millionaire sat by his window, looking out at the city lights. His home was finally alive again, and somewhere deep in his heart, he knew this wasn't just transformation. It was redemption. Months had passed since the maid first stepped into the mansion. Seasons changed, the trees outside turned green again, and the home that was once filled with tension now echoed with laughter, music, and the simple joy of everyday life. The millionaire no longer spent endless hours locked in his office. He'd learned to close his laptop earlier, to be present when the boys wanted to show him a drawing, or when they asked him to help build a fort out of couch cushions. The triplets had changed. They still had energy, plenty of it, but now it came with kindness. They picked up after themselves, said please and thank you, and even helped the gardener water the plants. Everywhere the maid went, peace seemed to follow. One bright afternoon, the family gathered in the backyard for a picnic, something they had never done before. The grass was freshly cut, the sky clear, and the boys ran around with homemade paper kites, laughing as the wind carried them higher. The millionaire sat on a blanket, watching them play. He looked more relaxed than he had in years. No suit, no phone in his hand, just a father, smiling at his children. The maid brought a tray of lemonade and sandwiches, setting it beside him. "They're growing fast," she said with a small smile. He nodded. "Too fast, maybe. I almost missed all of this." She looked at him kindly. "You didn't miss it, sir. You just paused for a while. Now you're back." He smiled, quietly grateful for her words. "I used to think I could fix everything with money, that hiring people, replacing things, keeping the house perfect would make us happy." He looked at his boys again and added softly, "But it was never the house that needed fixing. It was me." The maid said nothing. She just smiled, understanding completely. That evening, when the sun dipped low and the children fell asleep after their long day outdoors, the millionaire walked through the now quiet house. The smell of freshly baked cookies lingered in the air, and a faint tune, the same soft melody the maid often hummed, drifted from the kitchen. He stopped by the doorway and found her cleaning up. "As always, you never rest," he said gently. She looked up, wiping her hands. "I rest when everything feels right. Today, it does." He leaned against the doorframe, his eyes thoughtful. "You've given me something I can never repay." "I didn't give you anything, sir," she said with a gentle smile. "You just learned to see what was already here." He nodded slowly. "Still, I want you to stay, not as help, but as family. If you'll accept that." Her eyes widened slightly, then softened with emotion. "Family, yes," he said, smiling. "You've earned more than a salary. You've earned a place in our hearts." For a long moment, she said nothing. Her lips trembled slightly before she whispered, "Thank you, sir. I think I already feel like I belong." The next morning, the boys woke up early, too early, and burst into their father's room. "Dad, it's your turn," one shouted. He blinked, still half asleep. "My turn, for what?" "To clean up." The other said proudly, "We're all doing it today, even you." The maid appeared at the door, laughing softly. "It's our new Saturday rule. Everyone helps, even the boss." The millionaire sat up laughing. "Is that so?" "Yes," the boys said together. So they spent the morning dusting, folding, and tidying together. The house filled with laughter and playful teasing. At one point, one of the boys spilled a whole bucket of water across the floor. The maid froze for a second, then smiled. "You know what to do." The boy grinned, grabbed a towel, and said proudly, "I'll clean it up." The millionaire watched quietly, a deep warmth spreading in his chest. That simple phrase, "clean it up," had once sounded like scolding. Now, it was a symbol of love, patience, and growth. That night, the family gathered in the living room. The boys curled up beside their father on the couch, while the maid sat across from them, knitting quietly. The millionaire looked around the room, the warm light, the quiet hum of peace, the gentle breathing of his sons, and then he said softly, "You know, I used to think cleaning meant fixing what's outside, but I've learned it's also about what's inside. Our hearts, our patience, our love." The maid smiled. That's the real kind of clean, sir. The kind that lasts. He nodded. Yes. You taught me that. The triplets, already half asleep, mumbled. Clean it up. Their little voices fading into dreams. The millionaire chuckled softly. Looks like that lesson stuck. The maid whispered. It should. It's a good one.